I shared a cigarette with a man I was supposed to kill, and that's the kind of thing that doesn't sit neatly in a man's life. It doesn't fit the stories people expect. It's not the kind of memory you tell loud. It's not clean enough to be noble, and not ugly enough to be dismissed. It just stays with you, quiet, like something unfinished. And I'll tell you this right up front, son, that 1 minute in the bush changed something in me more than a lot of the louder things ever did. Because once you've seen the humanity in a man you were trained to call the enemy, it gets harder to put him back into a word that makes him easier to destroy. I was a kid then, though I wouldn't have called myself one. None of us would. We thought a rifle and exhaustion made us men overnight. The bush has a way of aging you fast. Heat, insects, wet gear, bad sleep, and that constant tension under your skin like your body never got permission to unclench. That day wasn't loud at first, just heavy. The air felt thick enough to chew. Sweat sat under your shirt and never dried. Mosquitoes worked on you like they had a job to do. Everything smelt like wet dirt, green rot, metal, and men who'd been in the same clothes too long. We'd been moving slow, careful, then slower, talking only when we had to. Even whispers felt like a risk. People who haven't been there sometimes imagine fear as this dramatic thing. Most of the time it isn't. Most of the time it's practical. It's checking your footing. It's listening harder than you breathe. It's being tired enough to resent your own heartbeat because it sounds too loud. I got put a little off from the others to watch a narrow patch where the brush opened up some. Nothing heroic about it, just where I was. I settled into a low spot, tried to make myself small, and waited. That was a lot of the job, really. Waiting in uncomfortable places while your mind tried to stay useful. Then the jungle changed. Not silent exactly. The insects were still there, leaves still moved, but it felt like the noise stepped back, like the whole place was listening. And then I saw him. Not a silhouette, not a movement through glass, a man, close enough to see his face when he saw mine. We froze at the same time. I had my rifle up. He had his up too. Not all the way, maybe, but enough. We were close enough that if either one of us made the wrong move, there wouldn't have been time to think after. I can still remember him in pieces, sweat on his face, mud on one sleeve, eyes that looked older than the rest of him. Tired eyes, the kind of tired you can't fake. We stood there looking at each other, both of us doing the same math. Distance, angle. Is he alone? Am I alone? Who moves first? Who survives first? My finger was where it was supposed to be. His probably was too. And neither of us fired. I can't tell you how long that first stare lasted. A second, maybe. 2. In memory, it feels like a full conversation. He glanced past me once, quick. I did the same past him. Still soldiers, still measuring danger. Then he did something that, even now, sounds made up when I say it out loud. He moved one hand slowly away from his rifle and toward his chest pocket. Every muscle in me tightened. I thought, this is it. He's reaching for something. But what he pulled out was a cigarette. Bent a little, damp at one end. He held it up between two fingers and looked at me like he was asking a question neither one of us had the language for. I must have looked confused, because he paused, then broke it in half with his thumb and held one piece out. You want half. That was the question. Now, I know how that sounds. If somebody told me that story before I lived it, I'd have said they were trying too hard to make meaning out of war. But there are moments in the bush where the world gets stripped down so far that the truth is just whatever is in front of you. And what was in front of me was this: two exhausted men with rifles, close enough to kill each other, and neither one wanting to be the first to drag the world back into motion. I didn't lower my weapon all the way. Neither did he. We both eased, just enough. I reached out and took the half. That's the image that stayed with me more than anything, the two of us. Dirty and tense and scared, passing a broken cigarette in bad light like it was something fragile. I had matches in a little waterproof tin. My hands felt clumsy all of a sudden. I struck one and cupped it. That tiny flame looked too bright in all that green. I lit mine first, then leaned the match toward him. He bent in and took the light. For a minute, maybe less, maybe more, we just stood there and smoked. No smile, no speech, no handshake. It wasn't friendship. Let's not dress it up. We were still afraid of each other. We still knew exactly what world we were standing in. If somebody else had come through that brush and seen us, the moment would have ended hard. But for that minute, the labels slipped. He wasn't the enemy in the useful, simple way. He was just a tired man trying to make it through another day. Same as me. I remember watching the smoke leave his mouth and thinking, plain as day, he's somebody's kid. And right after that, I got angry at myself for thinking it. Because part of staying alive is learning how not to think too much. You don't survive on poetry. You survive on discipline. You survive by doing what's in front of you and not letting your mind wander into places that weaken your hands. So I tried to put that thought away. When the cigarette burned down too short to hold, he dropped his end and ground it into the mud. I did the same. He gave one small nod. Not respect exactly, more like acknowledgement. We had shared a minute. We both knew it. Then he stepped back. I stepped back, and he disappeared into the brush. A few seconds later, I was back where I was supposed to be, heart hammering hard enough to make me mad. That's the part people always want changed when they hear a story like this. They want one of us to throw down a rifle. They want betrayal or redemption. They want some clear proof that humanity cancels duty. It didn't. We both went back to our positions. We both kept doing what soldiers do. Nobody abandoned anything. Nobody became a hero. The war resumed because wars do not care what two men understood for 1 minute. And that right there is the hardest truth in the whole thing. Back in the world, years later, I found out people like clean stories about conflict, clean sides, clean language. They want everyone sorted into boxes so the moral weight feels easier to carry. I understand why. Comfort makes simplicity feel natural. You come home to ordinary peace, dry clothes, cold water, a grocery store, traffic lights, kids riding bikes, neighbors complaining about small things, and, if you're lucky, you start loving that ordinary life more than you ever thought you would. I did. I still do. But comfort also gives people distance. And distance can make human beings feel abstract. I've stood in line and heard men talk real loud about what should happen to people they've never seen, never smelled the fear on, never looked in the eye. They use words that flatten whole lives into categories. Them comes easy when you're standing on polished floors with air conditioning and a full fridge at home. I'm not saying people mean harm. Most don't. I'm not preaching. I'm just telling you what changed in me. That cigarette cost me a certain kind of simplicity. Before that day, I could think in the language that helps a soldier function. Necessary language, distance language. The kind that keeps your hands steady. It's not evil, it's practical. Men depend on you being able to do your job, and doing your job often means not letting your mind get soft at the wrong time. After that day, I still did my job. That matters, and I won't pretend otherwise. I didn't become some saint in the jungle because I shared half a cigarette. I still got tired, scared, angry. I still followed orders. I still carried my responsibilities. But something had shifted, and it never shifted back. Later on, there were moments, little moments, when I'd look through a sight line and feel this flicker in the mind. Just a flicker. Long enough to know I was not looking at a category anymore. I was looking at a man. A man with a body that gets tired. A man who is probably somebody's son, maybe somebody's husband, maybe a father, maybe just a kid pretending not to be one, same as I had been. That didn't erase danger. It didn't erase duty. It just made the truth heavier. And heavy truth is hard to sleep beside. There's a myth that the hardest things to carry are always the loud moments. Sometimes they are, but for me, what lasted longest were the quiet corrections. The moments when your own conscience says, "Don't lie about what you saw. Don't make him less human now just because it helps the memory fit." Years later, I'd be doing something ordinary, cutting grass, fixing a hinge, standing in a hardware store, and a smell or a patch of heat would bring that minute back. Not like panic, more like a hand on the shoulder. That wet green air, that tiny flame. Two men trying not to tremble while pretending they were still only soldiers. And I'd remember the part that still unsettles me. We shared smoke, saw each other clearly, and then went right back to our positions. Both things are true. People sometimes ask, without asking it directly, which truth matters more, the humanity or the duty? I don't know how to answer that in a way that sounds good. If I say the cigarette meant nothing, I'm lying. If I say it changed everything, I'm also lying. What it changed was the way I understood what conflict asks of a person. It asks for discipline, yes. It asks for endurance, yes. But it also asks whether anyone says it out loud or not, what you are willing to do with the fact that the person across from you is human too. That is not a political statement. It's not an argument against responsibility. It's not an excuse for anything. It's just a truth I met face to face in the bush with a half cigarette in my hand. Back in the world, that truth made me slower to talk tough just for the sound of it. It made me wary of men who seemed too comfortable spending other people's pain with their mouths. It made me respect silence a little more. Real silence. The kind that comes when a person knows a thing is complicated and refuses to flatten it for applause. It also left me with a kind of grief I still can't name properly. Not grief because I failed my duty. I carried what was mine to carry, and I believe a man ought to. But grief for the fact that two men can recognize each other plainly, fear, fatigue, humanity and all, and still walk back into a reality that demands they aim true if the moment comes. No heroism in that. No romance either. Just burden. I've wondered about him over the years. Not all the time. Just now and then. Did he make it home? Did he ever tell the story? Did he sit somewhere later in life, cup of coffee in his hand, and think about the American kid with the waterproof matches? Or did that minute get buried under all the other minutes that came after? I'll never know. There was no reunion. No final chapter, no neat ending. Just a broken cigarette, two nods, and two men stepping backward into the brush and into whatever came next. Maybe that's why it stayed with me. Because it never resolved. It just kept asking its question. I'm older now. Older than I ever pictured being when I was a kid in the bush. The body reminds you in plain ways, knees, sleep, weather in the joints. Some memories fade. Others settle in and get quieter. And, strange as it sounds, the quieter they get, the clearer you hear them. Sometimes I sit outside in the evening when the neighborhood goes still, and I watch a man down the block stay in his truck an extra minute before going inside, just sitting there, gathering himself after the day. And I think maybe a lot of being a man is exactly that, carrying what you've seen without turning it into theater. That minute in the jungle taught me something I still can't package into a lesson, and maybe that's for the best. Maybe it taught me that duty and humanity are not opposites, but they don't sit easy together. Maybe it taught me that seeing clearly doesn't always tell you what to do, it just makes you more responsible for whatever you do next. Or maybe it simply taught me to be careful with easy words when talking about complicated people. All I know is this. For 1 minute in the bush, the war disappeared. Not from the rifles, not from the map, not from the danger, but from our faces. For 1 minute, 2 tired men stopped being enemies and became what they had been all along, human beings trying to survive the day. Then we went back to our positions, and the world asked us to forget what we had just seen. I never fully could. So here's the question that stayed with me, and I'll leave it with you the same way it was left with me, quiet, unresolved, and heavier with age. If you have seen the humanity of the man across from you, and you still have a duty to act, what exactly are you responsible for in your own soul after that?